Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel of history. So today we are going to be covering the 1950s. As I'm sure you can ask your grandparents, maybe if your parents, if you're a bit older, that the 1950s is remembered as the golden era, as it was a very peaceful time because America, after the Great Depression, America rushed into the Second World War. So obviously a depression, a world war, a lot going on. So this time, the 50s, the golden era, was described as more relaxing, more leisure. With this new era of relaxation, suburbs were formed as a slower, more leisure again lifestyle compared to the city. So a lot of people moved out of the cities and into the suburbs, and a lot of this consisted of the middle class. And there's this idea of affluence where there was more wealth, so the average family earned more income, and people were able to live more, the middle class was able to live more comfortably because of this more income in the suburbs. Okay, and so while there was this idea of conformity, of everybody being the same, living in the middle class, suburbs, and more traditional roles after the Second World War, and everybody wanted to continue the American culture as it had been before in previous decades, there was, of course, as there always, a counterculture. And this counterculture can be summed up with the music genre rock and roll. So parents, as we saw in the document, hate this. It's basically the subversive culture, and although this formed in the 1950s, it boomed even more in the 60s. And this is shown through juvenile delinquency and just kind of an overall rebellion. And the actor James Dean, who was famous at the time, fueled this and inspired a lot of the members in this group. And this music was, like I said, the counterculture, while other people were listening to Frank Sinatra and easier, calmer music. Rock and roll was a lot more in your face, like Elvis Presley, who we all know and love. So while rock and roll was booming, as was conformity, like I said. And there was also, with all this new culture and like the rock and roll conformity, there's so much going on. So what was formed was the Beats, or the Beat Generation, which is a group or movement formed by movement formed by authors to address the changes in culture and politics post-war, because there was a lot going on. And not only was there a lot going on in the culture, but also in politics, like they covered, because even though this was described as the golden era, there was still stuff going on like the Cold War. And Dwight Eisenhower was actually the president at the time, and he led the country through the Cold War. And he continued Truman's policy of containment, which was basically to stop the spread of communism. So basically, the 1950s can be thought of as the Fifties Society, which was the golden era. There was so much success after the Great Depression and World War II. Obviously, those were sad times. The 50s was just kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel, because there was a lot going good, as a bunch of new things were flourishing, like suburbs, like I said, with a slower pace. There was a more sense of happiness. Although, while this was such a happy time, we do still have to remember the bad parts of this time so as not to repeat them. So even though this was a peaceful state, and many do think of it as the American dream, and it was a slow leisure lifestyle, African Americans did not have as many rights as they should have, and their rights did not progress as the speed it should have, as rapid as it should have. It didn't, obviously, they should have gotten more rights at the time than they did. And also, although many do think of more traditional roles being fulfilled as a good thing, part of these traditional roles after the World War was women were forced into stiff gender roles and no longer had as much freedom as they did during the war, when men were off at war, of course. So yeah, those were just a few of the trends in the 1950s and how those impacted culture, politics, and overall the 50s society. Thanks for watching. Bye.